Hello, and welcome to the World War Lab channel. Today's story takes us deep into the Pacific, to a moment when desperation, innovation, and raw nerve collided in the air over the sea. At 6:30 on March 1, 1943, Major Ed Larner stood on the rain-soaked coral runway at Port Moresby, watching the crews of his B-25 Mitchell bombers prepare for a mission that higher command had already labeled impossible. Larner was 31 years old. He had flown 72 combat missions and, despite all that experience, had sunk exactly 0 enemy ships. The Japanese had dispatched a powerful convoy from Rabaul, 8 troop transports escorted by 8 destroyers, carrying close to 7,000 soldiers bound to reinforce their garrison at La. American intelligence had intercepted word of the convoy's departure. Every transport that made it to La meant thousands more enemy troops the Allies would eventually have to dig out of the New Guinea jungle with blood and time. Larner's problem was brutally simple. Traditional bombing from 10,000 feet gave ships far too much room to maneuver. Japanese captains had learned the pattern. They watched American bombers climb to altitude, calculated the bomb trajectories, and calmly turned their vessels away from the projected splash zones. For 8 months, 5th Air Force B-17s and B-25s had been trying to hit Japanese convoys. Their success rate hovered around 3%. Most bombs detonated harmlessly in empty ocean while the ships steamed on untouched. The math was merciless. A 1,000-pound bomb dropped from altitude took 37 seconds to hit the water. In those 37 seconds, a destroyer moving at 30 knots could cover nearly 400 yards, more than 3 football fields. Bombardiers aimed at where the ship was. The bomb struck where the ship had been. Larner had watched this play out mission after mission. Bombers returned with perfect aerial photographs showing neat bomb patterns surrounding the ships. Around them, never on them. Crews reported direct hits that later proved to be near misses. The Japanese kept sailing. American losses kept climbing. In the past month alone, Larner's squadron had lost 4 aircraft trying to attack convoys. 40 men gone. The Japanese shot down high-altitude bombers with cold efficiency. Their gunners had time to track incoming formations, calculate lead, and bracket the bombers with flak. By the time the bombs fell, half the squadron was already burning. General George Kenney, commanding the 5th Air Force, had proposed something that sounded insane to nearly every pilot who heard it. Skip the bomb across the water like a flat stone. Fly in at 50 feet. Release the bomb 300 yards out, fitted with a 5-second delay fuse. Let momentum carry it straight into the ship's hull. The bomb would skip once, maybe twice, then detonate on contact or just below the waterline. The theorists insisted it would work. The pilots said it was suicide. Flying a twin-engine bomber 50 feet above ocean swells, straight at a ship bristling with anti-aircraft guns, violated every survival instinct Larner had developed. Japanese destroyers carried 127mm main guns, 25mm machine cannons, and dozens of lighter weapons. All of them could track a bomber at that altitude. One solid hit to an engine and the B-25 would cartwheel into the sea before the crew could even react. Higher command had banned the tactic twice. Too dangerous. Too experimental. Unproven. Larner's request to practice skip bombing had been denied in December and again in January. The official response accused him of reckless disregard for equipment and personnel. Air crews were told to focus on proven high-altitude tactics. But high-altitude tactics weren't sinking ships. If you want to see how Larner's skip bombing experiment turned out, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Pacific War. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Back to Larner. He walked into the operations tent and spread reconnaissance photographs across the planning table. The Japanese convoy had been sighted at dawn, steaming southeast through the Bismarck Sea. 8 bulky transports arranged in 2 columns, destroyers screening the flanks. Every ship was packed with soldiers, artillery, fuel, and ammunition. If those transports reached La, the campaign in New Guinea could drag on for another year. Larner had an idea that would either vindicate Kenny's faith in low-altitude attacks or get 60 American airmen killed before lunch. The convoy would pass within striking range at 9 o'clock. 3 hours to prepare. 3 hours to teach his pilots to fly like they never had before. Larner summoned his squadron leaders into the tent and laid out the plan they had been officially forbidden to practice. The B-25 Mitchell hadn't been designed for what Larner was asking. It was built to hit targets from medium altitude using level bombing runs. Its twin Wright Cyclone engines could push it to 300 miles per hour in level flight. But that speed meant nothing if Japanese gunners had half a minute to track the approach. Kenny's modification changed everything. 5th Air Force mechanics had ripped out the bombardier's position in the nose and replaced it with 8.50 caliber machine guns aimed straight forward, 4 mounted in the nose and 4 in blisters along the fuselage. The B-25 was transformed into a flying gun platform capable of pouring nearly 200 rounds per second into a target. The theory was simple. Suppress the ship's anti-aircraft crews with machine gun fire during the approach. Give the gunners a reason to duck. Force them to choose between returning fire and staying alive. Larner had watched the mechanics bolt those guns onto his aircraft 3 weeks earlier. The modification added 1,200 pounds and shifted the center of gravity forward. It turned his bomber into something between an attack aircraft and a maritime strike fighter, a machine that hadn't really existed before. The practice runs had been carried out in secret. Kenny had located an old wreck called the Pruth, a 4,700-ton steamer that had run aground on Nader Reef near Port Moresby back in 1924. The rusting hulk sat half-submerged, making a perfect target. Larner's crews flew practice runs at dawn and dusk, when the light was poor and observers were scarce. They learned to skim the wave tops at 270 miles per hour. They learned to judge the release point by instinct and timing. And they learned what happened when you got it wrong. On February 16th, Lieutenant Jack Foster got it wrong. He came in too high, 70 feet instead of 50. His bomb skipped twice, cleared the wreck entirely, and detonated nearly 300 yards beyond it. Foster's bombardier, Sergeant Mike Russo, recalculated. Lower. Faster. Release closer. On the next run, Foster came in at 45 feet. The bomb skipped once and slammed into the wreck's hull just below the waterline. Right where a ship's magazine would be. Right where a single bomb could ignite 1,000 tons of ammunition and tear a destroyer apart from the inside. But the wreck hadn't been shooting back. Larner spread the latest reconnaissance photographs across the briefing table and jabbed a finger at the lead transport. 800 feet long. 10,000 tons displacement. Capable of carrying 1,500 troops. The convoy's flagship. Every officer in the tent understood what was at stake. Japanese reinforcements had already turned Buna into a 6-month nightmare that cost the Allies 5,000 casualties. La would be worse if those transports were allowed to unload. The mathematics of skip bombing demanded a level of precision most bomber crews had never even attempted. Approach altitude, 50 feet above the water. Approach speed, 270 miles per hour. Release point, 300 yards from the target. Bomb trajectory angle, 8 degrees. Delay fuse, 5 seconds. Miss any single variable and the bomb would either skip harmlessly over the ship, detonate short, or strike the water at the wrong angle and sink without exploding. Larner assigned each pilot a specific target. Transport 1 through Transport 8. Destroyers were secondary targets only if the transports were already burning. No bomber would attack the same ship twice. Maximum efficiency. Maximum destruction. 1 pass. 1 bomb. 1 chance. The crews filed out to their aircraft at 7 o'clock. 54 men climbing into 9 B-25s. Ahead of them, 13 Beaufighters from the Royal Australian Air Force would make the first strike, raking the convoy to suppress anti-aircraft fire. Above that, 16 B-17 Flying Fortresses would bomb from altitude, forcing the Japanese ships to maneuver and disrupting their formation. P-38 Lightning fighters would tangle with any Japanese Zeros that appeared. But the killing blow would come from Larner's 9 bombers at 50 feet. He climbed into his aircraft at 7:15. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Tom Bentz, was already moving through the pre-flight checklist. The bombardier, Staff Sergeant Carl Walsh, checked the bomb release mechanism for the 4th time. No one spoke. The crew had flown together for 9 months. They all knew what a 50-foot attack run meant. They all knew the odds. Larner started the port engine, then the starboard. The right cyclones coughed, caught, and settled into their familiar roar. Around him, 8 other B-25s spun up their engines. The formation would take off in flights of 3. Larner's flight first. They would stay low over the water the entire way in. Japanese radar couldn't reliably track aircraft below 100 feet. Surprise was the only advantage they had. At 7:45, Larner released the brakes and began his takeoff roll. By 9:30, he would know whether Kenny's theory worked, or whether he had just led his entire squadron into a slaughter. The flight to the Bismarck Sea took 90 minutes. Larner held his formation at 30 feet above the ocean, low enough that spray from the wave tops occasionally flecked his windscreen. The B-25s flew in a loose V, each aircraft spaced 200 yards apart. Close enough to maintain visual contact. Far enough that a single burst of flak couldn't take down 2 bombers. Radio silence. The Japanese monitored every frequency. One transmission and the convoy would know American aircraft were inbound. Surprise was worth more than coordination. Larner checked his watch. 8:30. The convoy should be 60 miles northeast, steaming at 12 knots toward the Vitiaz Strait. According to the dawn reconnaissance report, they were right on schedule. Below him, the ocean was empty. No whitecaps of ships. No patrol boats. Just endless blue water stretching to the horizon. Flying this low, Larner couldn't see more than 5 miles ahead. The convoy could be anywhere. His navigation had to be perfect. 5 degrees off course and they'd miss the target completely. Approach from the wrong angle and the destroyers would have time to swing their main guns around. At 8:52, Larner spotted smoke on the horizon. Thick black diesel exhaust from 16 ships steaming in formation. He keyed his throat microphone once. A single click, the signal to tighten formation. His wingmen answered with single clicks of their own. Radio discipline held. As they closed, the convoy took shape. 2 columns of transports, 4 ships in each column. Destroyers screened the formation 2 miles ahead and along both flanks. Larner counted gun positions on the nearest destroyer. 6 main turrets. Dozens of smaller mounts. Every one of them would be tracking his approach once they crested the horizon. At 8:57, the Beaufighters went in. From 3 miles out, Larner watched 13 Australian aircraft dive on the convoy from the northeast. Their 20mm cannons shredded destroyer decks. Tracers arced across the water. Japanese anti-aircraft guns swung toward the new threat, barrels elevating, crews scrambling. Exactly as planned. The Beaufighters weren't there to sink ships. They were there to make the gunners look the wrong way. 30 seconds later, the B-17s arrived at 10,000 feet. Larner saw bomb bay doors yawn open. Bombs tumbled downward. The Japanese ships began evasive maneuvers, turning hard to port and starboard. Columns broke apart. Spacing widened. Destroyers surged to flank speed, white water boiling behind their sterns. Confusion spread across the formation. Perfect. Larner pulled back on the throttles and descended to 40 feet. Airspeed dropped to 260 miles per hour. Walsh began calling distances in a steady voice. 4,000 yards. 3,800. 3,600. Each ship was now clearly visible. Larner selected his target, the second transport in the port column. 700 feet long. Riding low in the water, fully loaded. His bomb would strike amidships, right where the troop compartments were crammed with soldiers. The destroyer on the left flank spotted them. Larner saw the muzzle flashes first. The opening shells arced toward his formation, Too high. The Japanese gunners were still accustomed to tracking bombers at altitude. They hadn't adjusted to a 50-foot attack yet. At 2,000 yards, Larner opened fire. All 8.50 caliber machine guns thundered at once. Tracers stitched across the transport's superstructure. Glass exploded. Metal sparked. Men on deck dropped flat or dove for cover. The suppression was working. Anti-aircraft crews couldn't return fire while .50 caliber rounds were ripping through their positions at nearly 800 rounds per minute. 1,200 yards. Larner's wingmen began to spread out, each bomber lining up on its assigned target. The formation broke apart exactly as planned, 9 bombers attacking 9 ships at the same moment. No time for the defenders to shift fire. No time to coordinate a response. 800 yards. The destroyer's main guns fired again. This time the shells bracketed Larner's flight. Close enough to rock the aircraft with concussive force. Shrapnel rattled off the fuselage. Tom, the co-pilot, called out damage. Port engine oil pressure dropping, still in the green. 600 yards. The transport filled Larner's windscreen. He could see individual soldiers scrambling across the deck, could see the bridge windows, could see gun crews swinging their weapons toward him. Every instinct screamed to pull up, to climb, to escape the wall of steel rushing toward him at a combined closing speed of 300 miles per hour. 400 yards. Walsh's voice cut through the engine roar. Bomb armed. Ready for release. 300 yards. Larner pressed the release. He felt the aircraft lurch upward as 1,000 pounds dropped away. The bomb tumbled forward on momentum, struck the water nose first, skipped once like a flat stone, and streaked straight toward the transport's hull. Larner hauled back on the control yoke and climbed hard. Behind him, the 5-second fuse was already counting down. The bomb detonated at the waterline. Larner didn't see the explosion. His vision was filled with sky, but he felt it. The shockwave slammed into the B-25 like a physical blow, lifting the tail and throwing the aircraft sideways. Tom fought the controls as the altimeter spun past 100 feet, then 200, then 3. Larner risked a glance back. The transport was tearing itself apart. A column of fire and thick black smoke erupted from amidships. The hull buckled with a shriek of metal. Secondary explosions rippled through the superstructure as ammunition stores cooked off. The ship listed sharply to port, water pouring through the massive hole torn in its side. Soldiers were already jumping overboard, dozens of tiny figures abandoning a dying ship. One bomb. 15 seconds from release to catastrophic damage. Skip bombing worked. To Larner's right, Lieutenant Jake Fawcett's bomber was pulling up from its own run. Another transport was ablaze, flames crawling up its forward mast. To the left, Captain Bill Hayes had just released on a destroyer. His bomb skipped twice and struck below the aft turret. The destroyer's stern lifted clear of the water as the internal explosion tore through it. When it crashed back down, the entire rear third of the ship was gone. The destroyer began settling by the stern, sinking fast. 4 targets hit in the first 90 seconds. The Japanese convoy was in chaos, but the defenders were adapting. A destroyer on the far flank swung around to face the attackers. Its main guns fired in rapid succession. The shells walked across the water toward Lieutenant Tom Mitchell's B-25. The first missed by 50 yards. The second by 20. The third hit. Mitchell's aircraft disintegrated. The bomb slung beneath the fuselage detonated on impact. The explosion vaporized the bomber instantly. No parachutes. No survivors. 5 men gone between one heartbeat and the next. Larner watched debris scatter across the sea. There was no time to process it. No time to mourn. The attack was still unfolding. The remaining B-25s pressed on. Lieutenant Carl Johnson lined up on the lead transport, the convoy's flagship. His approach was flawless. 50 feet. 270 miles per hour. Machine guns hammering. Japanese gunners fired back with everything they had, 20mm cannons, heavy machine guns, even rifles. The air between Johnson's bomber and the ship was thick with tracers. Johnson's release was perfect. The bomb skipped once and punched through the transport's hull just forward of the bridge. The delay fuse allowed it to burrow deep before detonating. The explosion tore through 3 decks at once. Fire erupted from the cargo holds. Larner knew what was stored down there: ammunition, artillery shells, fuel drums. The transport became a floating furnace. Men burned on deck or leapt into the sea trailing smoke. Lieutenant Paul Warren's bomber took hits on the approach. A Japanese gunner on one of the destroyers had finally adjusted for the low-altitude attack. 20mm shells ripped through Warren's port wing. Fuel streamed from the punctured tank. Warren held his course. 300 yards. 200. At 150 he released. The bomb skipped and struck the transport below the waterline. Warren banked hard to the right, trailing fire. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Dave Miller, activated the fire suppression system. The flames died. The bomber stayed airborne, barely. 6 transports were now burning or sinking. 2 destroyers were damaged. 1 B-25 was gone. The entire attack had lasted 4 minutes. Then the second wave arrived. 9 more B-25s from the 90th Bomb Squadron, led by Major Ralph Kell, came in low. They had watched Larner's attack from 5 miles out. They knew the tactic worked. They also knew the price. Kell's formation spread apart, each bomber choosing a target among the ships still afloat. This time, the Japanese were ready. Every gun in the convoy tracked low. Destroyers formed a defensive line, their main batteries firing in coordinated volleys. The ocean exploded with shell splashes. The barrage was intense, deliberate, lethal. The Japanese had learned from the first attack, and they intended to make the Americans pay for the second. Kell brought his bomber in from the east, straight out of the rising sun. Japanese gunners squinted, half-blind, firing at shadows. His bomb struck a transport that was already listing. The explosion hastened the inevitable. The ship rolled onto its side and slipped under in less than 2 minutes. 1,200 soldiers went down with it. Lieutenant Harold Jensen wasn't as fortunate. His approach angle was wrong, too shallow, too fast. His bomb skipped 3 times, cleared the destroyer entirely, and detonated harmlessly beyond the convoy. Jensen pulled up and circled for another run. The Japanese destroyer he had missed tracked him through the entire turn. When Jensen came back around for a second pass, the ship was ready. The first shell tore away his port engine. The second slammed straight into the cockpit. Jensen's B-25 rolled inverted and struck the sea at nearly 300 miles per hour. There was no explosion, just impact. The ocean closed over the aircraft and moved on as if nothing had happened. 2 bombers down. 7 transports sinking. 3 destroyers crippled. The battle had been raging for 8 minutes when Larner realized, with sudden and chilling clarity, that the Japanese still had roughly 60 Zero fighters somewhere above the clouds. The Zeros appeared at 9:15. 18 of them, diving out of 12,000 feet. Larner spotted them through scattered cloud layers, silver shapes plunging downward like hawks going after field mice. The P-38 Lightnings were supposed to keep them busy. Something had gone wrong. Either the Lightnings were outnumbered, or the Japanese had committed a second fighter group no one knew about. Larner's B-25 was exposed. Low on fuel. Low on ammunition. The forward guns had maybe 200 rounds left. Not enough for a prolonged fight. Not enough to stop a determined Zero pilot who had learned to respect American bombers the hard way. He shoved the throttles forward and dropped to wavetop height. 20 feet. 15. The propellers churned salt spray into the air. The Zeros split into 2 groups. Half stayed high to engage the P-38s. The other 9 dove after the bombers. They came in fast, 400 miles per hour, firing their 20mm cannons from 1,000 yards out. Larner saw tracers slash past his canopy. Too close. He jinked left, then right, forcing the attackers to adjust. Behind him, Staff Sergeant Tommy Blake manned the dorsal turret, firing short, controlled bursts at the nearest zero. The Japanese fighter broke away. Not damaged, just cautious. Lieutenant Warren's crippled bomber wasn't as fortunate. A zero latched onto his tail and stayed there. Warren tried everything: dives, climbs, hard banking turns that punished his already damaged wing. Nothing worked. The Zero pilot was skilled and patient. He waited until Warren bled off airspeed in a climbing turn, then fired a 2-second burst. Warren's starboard engine exploded. The bomber pitched forward and plunged into the sea. Larner saw 3 parachutes blossom, 3 out of 5. Better than nothing. The Zeros pressed their attack for 6 minutes. Then, just as suddenly, they broke off and climbed. Larner didn't understand why until he saw it. The B-17s were coming back in for another pass at 10,000 feet. The Zeros had to choose: attack the bombers below or protect what remained of the convoy from above. They chose above. The heavy bombers were the greater threat. Larner used the brief reprieve to assess damage. His port engine was running rough. Oil pressure fluctuated. Fuel showed 60%. Enough to get back to Port Moresby. Maybe. He looked back at the convoy. 8 transports had been hit. 7 were sinking or already gone. The 8th was still afloat but burning, trying to limp toward the New Britain coast. All 4 destroyers in the screening line were damaged. 2 sat dead in the water. The other 2 circled the wreckage, attempting to recover survivors. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea wasn't over. It was 9:21. The opening attack had lasted 11 minutes, but the killing would continue for 3 more days. American bombers would return every 6 hours. PT boats would hunt survivors drifting in lifeboats. The Japanese had committed 7,000 troops to the convoy. Fewer than 1,200 would ever reach La. The rest would drown, burn, or die of exposure beneath the tropical sun. Larner turned for home. His formation was scattered across 30 miles of ocean. 4 bombers were confirmed lost. 20 men dead or missing. But the mission had worked. Skip bombing had proven itself in the most brutal way imaginable. The technique would be refined, standardized, and taught to every bomber squadron in the Pacific. Within 6 months, Japanese commanders would abandon attempts to move large convoys within range of Allied air power. Supply lines to their forward bases would collapse. The war would turn. But Larner didn't know any of that yet. He only knew his fuel gauge was dropping, his engine was failing, and Port Moresby lay 90 minutes away. He ordered the crew to dump everything non-essential: unused ammunition, spare guns, tools, anything that reduced weight. The B-25 struggled to hold altitude with 1 engine running rough. At 10:10, Ben spotted land, the southern coast of New Guinea. They were barely on course. The port engine was shaking violently now. Oil streamed from a crack in the housing. The temperature needle crept into the red. 5 more minutes and it would seize completely. Larner feathered the port propeller and transferred all power to the starboard engine. Airspeed dropped to 180 miles per hour, just above stall speed, just enough to stay airborne. The coastline crept closer. 40 miles. 30. 20. The engine held. Larner touched down at Port Moresby at 11:17. The runway was lined with ground crews, mechanics, intelligence officers. Word had spread. The convoy had been hit hard. No one yet knew how hard. Larner shut down the engines and sat motionless in the cockpit for 30 seconds, hands still locked around the control yoke. Ben sat beside him, equally silent. Neither man moved. They had been airborne for 3 hours and 42 minutes. It felt like 3 days. The debrief lasted 2 hours. Larner and the surviving pilots sat inside the operations tent while intelligence officers asked the same questions over and over, phrased slightly differently each time. How many ships hit? How many sinking? How many bombs released? How many aircraft lost? They were assembling a picture from fragments. 9 pilots had gone in. 5 had returned. Mitchell was gone. Jensen was gone. Warren was in the water, his surviving crew later picked up by a Catalina flying boat. 2 men were wounded. The reconnaissance photos arrived at 1300 hours. An Australian Beaufort had photographed the convoy from 15,000 feet at noon. The images confirmed what Larner's crews could only guess. 8 transports, 7 confirmed sunk or sinking. The 8th beached along the New Britain coast, burning. 4 destroyers, 2 sunk, 2 severely damaged and withdrawing toward Rabaul. From the first attack to the last ship going down, 3 hours passed. General Kenny arrived at Port Moresby at 1600 hours. He walked straight into the operations tent and spread the reconnaissance photographs across the briefing table. He didn't congratulate anyone. He didn't shake hands. He pointed at the burning transport beached along the coast and said, "Finish it." The Australian Beaufighters would make another run at dusk. Nothing could be allowed to reach La. Nothing. The second strike launched at 1730. Larner didn't fly this one. His bomber needed a replacement engine. Instead, he stood on the runway and watched 9 fresh B-25s lift off into the setting sun. They would reach the target at dusk. Japanese survivors would be trying to salvage what they could from the wrecks and the beach transport. They wouldn't expect another attack. They were wrong. The strike returned at 2000 hours. The beach transport was gone, sunk at its moorings. The 2 damaged destroyers had been caught while attempting to withdraw, both hit, both sinking. The Japanese had begun the operation with 16 ships. By nightfall on March 2nd, 14 lay on the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. The remaining 2 destroyers limped back to Rabaul around midnight, barely afloat. The loss of life was catastrophic. 7,000 Japanese soldiers had embarked at Rabaul. Reconnaissance flights over the following 2 days counted roughly 900 survivors reaching the New Britain coast by lifeboat or by swimming. American PT boats intercepted most of the lifeboats. Some survivors were rescued. Others were killed in the water. In those 3 days, the line between combat and massacre blurred. Orders came down, no quarter. The Japanese had machine-gunned American aircrews in their parachutes. The Americans responded in kind to soldiers in the water and men clinging to lifeboats. Larner learned about it 3 days later. He didn't ask for details. He didn't want to know which PT boat crews had fired on lifeboats, or which bomber crews had strafed survivors swimming for shore. The war had rules, until it didn't. Those rules had stopped applying somewhere between Mitchell's bomber disintegrating in midair and the final Japanese transport slipping beneath the waves. Nobody talked about it. Nobody wrote it into after-action reports. It happened anyway. The final numbers arrived on March 7th. Japanese losses: 8 transports sunk, 4 destroyers sunk. Approximately 3,000 troops drowned. Another 1,500 were killed by air attack. Roughly 1,200 reached La on foot through the jungle, without weapons, without supplies, without organization. They were combat ineffective. The reinforcement operation had failed completely. American losses: 4 B-25s, 1 B-17, 2 P-38s. 13 aircrew killed. 6 wounded. Against an entire Japanese convoy, the exchange rate was brutally one-sided. Skip bombing had worked, but it worked only because Larner's crews were willing to fly straight at destroyers at 50 feet while anti-aircraft fire turned the air into solid metal. Courage didn't quite describe it. Insanity came closer. Kenny called it the most decisive air-sea battle of the Pacific War. Admiral Yamamoto called it a disaster. The Japanese Navy immediately canceled all future large convoy operations within range of Allied land-based air power. The supply line to New Guinea was severed. Garrisons at La, Salamaua, and Madong would have to survive on what they already had. They wouldn't last long. But the Battle of the Bismarck Sea changed more than Japanese strategy. It reshaped how air forces around the world thought about attacking ships. The Americans refined skip bombing. The British adopted it. The Soviets copied it. By 1944, low-altitude bombing had become standard doctrine for maritime strike aircraft worldwide. Larner flew 16 more combat missions before rotating home in May. He never spoke publicly about the battle. He gave no interviews. He never wrote a memoir. He had done what needed to be done. That was enough. The question no one could answer was simple. Would the same tactic work against a prepared enemy? The Japanese tested that question 3 months later. On June 3, 1943, American reconnaissance spotted another convoy assembling at Rabaul, 6 transports, 8 destroyers. This time, the Japanese sailed at night. This time, they had 60 Zero fighters providing continuous air cover. This time, every destroyer carried additional 20mm anti-aircraft guns specifically positioned to counter low-altitude attacks. They had learned from the Bismarck Sea. They had adapted. The 5th Air Force attacked at dawn. 12 B-25s using skip bombing. The results were different. 2 transports hit. 1 destroyer damaged. 3 B-25s shot down. The exchange rate had shifted. Japanese anti-aircraft defenses had improved dramatically. Gunners who survived the Bismarck Sea had trained their replacements. They knew to track low. They knew to fire early. They knew to concentrate on bombers during the final approach, when the aircraft were committed and unable to maneuver. The Americans adapted in turn. By July, 5th Air Force mechanics had added armor around cockpits and engines. Forward-firing armament was increased to 12.50 caliber machine guns. Some B-25s carried 14. The theory stayed the same: suppress defensive fire with overwhelming firepower on the approach. Give enemy gunners no choice but to take cover or die. The modification worked. On November 2, 1943, 38 B-25s attacked Rabaul Harbor in the largest skip-bombing raid of the war. The harbor held 18 warships. 30 ships took direct hits. 1 heavy cruiser was sunk. 1 destroyer was sunk. 2 auxiliary vessels were destroyed. 16 merchant ships were damaged or sinking. The raid lasted 18 minutes. American losses totaled 2 B-25s. The exchange rate had swung back in America's favor. But Rabaul proved something else as well. Skip bombing worked best against ships confined by geography, vessels unable to maneuver freely, ships anchored in harbors or trapped in narrow straits. Against a convoy in the open ocean, with room to maneuver and fighter cover overhead, the tactic became extremely dangerous. Against ships at anchor, however, it was devastating. The British adopted skip bombing in late 1943. Royal Air Force strike fighters equipped with the technique attacked German convoys off the coast of Norway. The results echoed the Pacific experience: high casualties, but a high success rate. The Germans responded by mounting additional anti-aircraft guns on their merchant ships and requiring convoys to sail only under heavy fighter escort. The cost of moving supplies by sea skyrocketed, while effectiveness dropped in proportion. The Soviets also employed skip bombing against German shipping in the Black Sea and the Baltic. Their version was cruder: lower approach altitudes, heavier bombs, less suppressive fire. The results were mixed. Some ships were sunk. Many bombers were lost. The Soviet crews had courage, but they lacked the training depth and equipment refinement the Americans had developed through trial and error in the Pacific. By 1944, skip bombing had evolved far beyond its original form. American tactics now relied on layered, coordinated attacks. High-altitude bombers struck first, forcing ships to maneuver. Fighters followed, strafing to suppress anti-aircraft fire. Then the skip bombers came in low, hitting targets while defenses were distracted and disorganized. The approach reduced losses while preserving lethality. The statistics told the story. Between March 1943 and August 1945, American aircraft using skip bombing sank or severely damaged 212 Japanese vessels. The cost was 47 bombers lost. A kill ratio of 4.5 ships per bomber. By comparison, high-altitude bombing achieved a ratio of just 0.3 ships per bomber. Skip bombing was 15 times more effective. The human cost was harder to measure. Skip bombing required crews to fly straight at ships bristling with weapons, holding a steady course while tracers filled the air around them. The psychological strain was immense. Pilots who flew skip bombing missions had shorter combat tours, higher rates of combat fatigue, and more frequent medical groundings for stress-related conditions. The tactic worked. It also broke many of the men who flew it. Larner never flew skip bombing missions again after May 1943. He trained new crews, watched them take off using the method he had helped prove, and watched some of them not return. By the end of the war, he had trained 62 pilots in skip bombing. 18 were killed in action. 23 were wounded. The math was unforgiving, a 29% fatality rate and a 66% casualty rate including wounded. Better than high-altitude bombing. Worse than almost any other aviation combat role. Military historians would debate for decades whether skip bombing shortened the war. The answer was complex. Skip bombing didn't win battles on its own, but it strangled Japanese supply lines, made reinforcement prohibitively expensive, and forced the Japanese Navy to abandon large-scale convoy operations. Without supplies, garrisons weakened. Without reinforcements, defensive positions collapsed. Islands fell one by one. What remains beyond debate is this. On March 2nd and 3rd, 1943, 9 B-25 bombers flying at 50 feet destroyed an entire Japanese convoy in roughly 15 minutes of sustained combat. The tactic had been banned twice. It had been called suicide by nearly everyone who heard of it. It was proven effective by men willing to fly into walls of anti-aircraft fire because the alternative was allowing 7,000 enemy soldiers to reach their destination. The bombers that attacked the Bismarck Sea convoy were scrapped after the war. None survived as museum aircraft. Major Ed Larner returned to the United States in June 1943. He was 31 years old. He had flown 88 combat missions and survived longer than most bomber pilots in the Pacific. The Army Air Forces wanted him to train new crews, to pass on what he had learned. He refused. Larner requested, and received, a transfer to transport aircraft. He spent the remainder of the war flying C-47s, moving supplies and personnel across the Pacific. No combat. No skip bombing. No more missions where he watched crews he had trained die in aircraft he had taught them to fly. He never explained the decision. He didn't need to. Command understood. Some men could keep flying combat after what they had seen. Others couldn't. There was no shame in either choice. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel in December 1943. He declined the promotion twice before accepting. He didn't want recognition. He wanted to finish the war and go home. He did, in September 1945. Japan surrendered. Larner mustered out 3 months later with a Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 Air Medals, and a Purple Heart from shrapnel wounds he had never mentioned in any after-action report. Larner died in 1997 in Sacramento, California. He was 85 years old. His obituary mentioned his military service in a single sentence. It did not mention the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. It did not mention skip bombing. It did not mention that he helped prove a tactic that reshaped naval warfare. He had asked his family not to discuss it. They honored that request. General George Kenney received most of the historical credit for skip bombing. That was fine with Larner. Kenney had conceived the theory. Larner had proven it worked. The distinction mattered to historians. It didn't matter to the pilots who flew the missions. They knew who had led the first attack. They knew who had trained them. They knew whose techniques kept them alive when Japanese gunners tracked them at 50 feet. The B-25 Mitchell became legendary in part because of skip bombing. It served in every theater of World War II, but its reputation was forged in the Pacific, flying missions that should not have been survivable. By war's end, B-25s had sunk more enemy shipping than any other bomber type. The technique Larner and his crews proved in March 1943 became standard doctrine for every B-25 unit in the Pacific. No museum displays a B-25 that flew in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. The aircraft were worn out by the end of the war. Most were melted down for aluminum. A few survive today, restored or displayed as static exhibits. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio has one. So does the Smithsonian. Neither flew at the Bismarck Sea, but they represent the crews who did. The battle itself is largely forgotten outside military history circles. It lacks the name recognition of Midway or Guadalcanal. No major films were made about it. No iconic photographs captured the moment. Only after-action reports, reconnaissance images, and the testimony of men who mostly chose not to talk about what they had done. What remains is this. In March 1943, a group of American bomber crews proved that aircraft could sink ships by skipping bombs across water at 50 feet. The tactic was called suicide before it worked. It was called genius afterward. The truth lay somewhere between. It was desperation meeting innovation. Men willing to try something untested because tested methods had failed. Courage measured not in speeches, but in the decision to hold course while anti-aircraft fire turned the air lethal. The Pacific War changed after the Bismarck Sea. Japanese convoys stopped sailing within range of Allied air power. Supply lines collapsed. Garrisons starved. Islands fell. The war moved closer to Japan one island at a time, and the Japanese Navy could not stop it because it could no longer supply its forward positions. Skip bombing didn't win the war alone, but it closed the supply routes Japan needed to keep fighting. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. The United States? The United Kingdom? Canada? Australia? Our community spans the entire world. You're not just watching, you're helping keep these memories alive. Tell us you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Ed Larner and his crews don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.